Hi, this is Megan Jacks, Creative Memories Independent Advisor. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to make this jumbo swell. This is a technique that I first saw used on Instagram from a Japanese advisor. And I took the time playing with the tools to kind of figure out how is a best way to do this. And so I'm going to be showing you that technique in this video. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about patterns that work well for this, because not all patterns work great. So this particular pattern I'm using is from the Art Nouveau collection. You can see on one side we have a very tonal pattern here. It's the actual print itself is fairly small. It's tonal because when we do this, we're going to have a seam right here in the middle of the paper. And if you have a pattern that is too busy, it's a challenge to line things up so that it feels smooth and cohesive. There are a couple of ways that you can kind of deal with that when actually putting the rest of your layout together. But in general, patterns will matter for this layout. So I went with a thin stripe pattern that I'm doing horizontal. If I had tried to do this vertically, I'll show you once we actually get into cutting, it would have been more of a challenge to line things up. You would definitely have noticed here in the middle that the top and other patterns, it would have been off kilter just a little bit trying to line things up. So to get started with this, we're going to start with two 6x6 squares. So I have a piece of paper and I'm going to be using the Boho Escape collection. And on this side, you are going to see that I have a little bit of more of a chunky contrasty pattern. So I'm going to be showing you how that is impacted by doing this, how the pattern affects the overall look. So the first thing we need to do here is we're going to cut this to 6 inches. When you start to play with this technique a little bit more, you can actually vary the overall size, the width of your paper, depending on how wide you want your swells to be. I'm going for a pretty chunky swell, so I'm using a 6-inch width. So here I have two 6x6 squares. And you can see here how they line up. We'll flip it over so we can see the other side. This is how they line up there. So two 6x6 squares. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stack them on top of each other. And I'm going to go ahead and cut them together. So I've stacked mine. I've got my trimming mat here. With this trimming mat, what I'm going to recommend here is that you're actually going to want to rotate this. I want to make sure that I can have my full grid here. If you can see, if I had this regular down here in this corner, I lose my grid lines across here. If I rotate it, I have grid lines again, and I'm going to need the grids in that corner. So I'm going to stack my 6x6 squares and I'm going to line them. I'm going to center them over the 6-inch mark. And it doesn't have to be the 6-inch mark. You can really center them anywhere. I just want to make sure they're centered because I will be using these outer markings here to guide me as I go along. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I need to grab my jumbo circle and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to be cutting right along up to this corner. So I'm going to come forward from the corner just a little bit. I want to make sure my blade doesn't get stuck on that corner. So I've got my circle. I've lined it up here and there at the corners. I'm using this to help keep it, nice and an even cut. And then I'll be using the red blade. And now you should be okay cutting the two pieces together. I am going to make one additional point about this. When you're lining this up, you want to make sure that you can, at all possible, keep one edge and the bottom edge even with each other. So I'm making sure that I'm nice and even along and I'm square on and I'm not centered anymore. Let me go back so I'm centered. Between 9 and 3. So this is an area definitely where you want to take time. And you want to also make sure that you're, kind of constantly keeping a little bit of pressure here where you have the paper stacked so they don't come unstacked and they don't move. because since we're cutting both pieces at once, that's what helps us line things up in terms of width later. And I'm going to use my red blade, and I'm going to start off, and I'm going to come around and trim these pieces. And you can go ahead and pull the blade or the circle off. You can pull those pieces away if you want. You can see I've got a start to that swell. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come about 3.5 inches forward. So if I start back here and assume this is 1, so it'll be 1, 2, 3.5. So I'm going to come here at this line, which is actually 2.5 inches from the bottom, is where I'm going to make my next cut. So once again, I'm going to be using those lines. I'm coming right in here on either side, and I'm lining my blade up, or my template up. And I'll go ahead and make another cut. And this is the area where, depending on the width of your swells, what you could do. I could have come back here and I could have made a narrower swell. I can make a 3-part swell by cutting all sorts of different pieces there. So the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to come forward, and I lost my little square. I'm going to come forward 1.5 inches. So here, I was back here at this one. I'm going to come forward 1 inch and then 1/2 inch. So I'm at the actual 1 inch mark here on my template. And that 1 inch mark should let me just clear this front edge. And for this, the purpose of this particular exercise, I want to make sure that I can clear this point up here. If for some reason that coming forward to 1.5 inches is too much, if I was too close here, I would dial it back. As long as I'm even, it should be fine. I just want to make sure I'm going to clear this front edge with my red blade. So that should be good. And I'll come here and make one final cut, holding everything down. And now I am free. I've got my cuts made. So you can see what I have is I have 2 thicker swell, or 2 thicker pieces, and 2 thinner ones. And of course, the opposite sides. So to put this together, I've got a piece of kind of tonal paper. And this is where you can kind of mix and match things a little bit. You can figure out whether you want to have if you have a boulder pattern, is that going to be the one that's showing through here? You can see here how it's starting to take shape. And you can see along here, I have a break in my pattern. It actually happens to work out okay for this, the way this one worked, just because of this look here. It's not terribly noticeable that there is a break in the pattern, but depending on, yeah, it actually works out okay. So, but I don't think I want this bold print to be my big pattern. I think I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go this way. And I'm going to make a little more of the solid tonal pattern here. And so you can kind of see there a little bit. It might be kind of hard to see, but you can definitely see where that break in the pattern is right there. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my boulder print off to the side here for the accent swell. And I lucked out here pretty, I think it works pretty good. The break in the pattern isn't too bad. But one of the things you can do here when you're actually putting your photos on, because we want to make sure that our photo placement is good, is that you could use a smaller piece here and put kind of a piece in like that. It's kind of hard to see because it's the navy on the darker colors, but you can kind of see how that would work out. And then if we were to do more photos on here, a placement that works pretty good is to go ahead and tuck under here to let that swell show. You just work so hard to make this really neat swell. You want to make sure that that's still showing. So I've got some, these are, would represent 4x6s that I've cut off about 1/4 of an inch. So they are 5.75 wide and 3.75 tall. So there you can start to see how it could potentially take shape. You can mix and match these papers here. You could do 3 swells. You could do different size swells. I've got a really big chunky one here, but you could kind of take it back if you want. The key is to use the jumbo circle on, and I would recommend using the outside track, and then making sure that you're using 6-inch width of paper. If you wanted this to be narrower, you're still using that 6-inch width to start with, but as you come forward with each one of your cuts, you just maybe wouldn't make them as big of a step. So instead of that 3.5-inch step that we took at first, maybe you would do a series of 3 1-inch steps, and you could have a 3-banded swell that would only be about 3 to 3.5 inches wide total. So play around with it. It's a lot of fun. Huge thanks out to the Japanese advisor who put that layout on Instagram. I was really terrible, and I saved the layout, but I didn't get the name of the person who did it. So I apologize to that person, but definitely give it a try. It's lots of fun. Thanks for watching.